Hello, this is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today radio show. We're coming to you live from the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota. If you're in Bismarck tonight and are interested in having a drink or a good meal in a warm and festive atmosphere in a place that's just bubbling over with historical character and otherwise, you can come down and enjoy yourself. We're going to be speaking tonight about two subjects. First of all, we're going to be talking about property appraisals, and this might sound a bit arcane, but it relates to property taxes, it relates to home mortgage sales, it relates to all sorts of things that are important to North Dakotans. We're also going to be talking about the North Dakota Senate's decision this morning to vote in favor of giving $850,000 to the Board of Higher Education to buy out the contract of the Chancellor, Mr. Dr. Ham Shirvani, who has been on the job all of 7 months. And first of all, let's talk about some of the things that went on in the legislature today. We had a couple of bills in the Senate that affected the sales tax, and they were both defeated. One of them would have exempted clothing from North Dakota's 5% sales tax. The other would have dropped the sales tax rate from 5% to 4.5%. Those were both defeated. The Senate also approved a new University of North Dakota Medical School building for $124 million. The governor had included in his budget a proposal for a renovated and expanded medical school, one that would have renovated an existing building. It's a former hospital on the campus, and also added on another structure for the medical school. The Senate, instead of supporting building a brand new medical school across the street from the existing one, and this led to a rather interesting discussion of the merits of the building that the medical school is in now. And we have one of the members of the North Dakota Senate is a Republican Grand Forks architect. His name is Lonnie Lafine, and he was quite blunt about the capabilities of the present hospital building that's used as a medical school. He said it's a crappy building. We need to build a new one. There was in the House a bill to toughen penalties against drunken drivers after a fashion. If you are .21 or greater, you are eligible for 1 day in jail. If you're not scheduled to work on that day, that's the mandatory jail sentence that is in store if a drunken driver is arrested and convicted with a .21 or greater. Also, the fine would be $500 instead of $250. The fact that you needed to be that plastered in order to come into the line of a mandatory 1 day jail sentence provided some interesting debate on the House floor. There was wonder about whether that was a bit too much. The Senate has, in terms of, giving someone that much of a break, you have to. I mean, someone does not get to .21 by having a few beers, and there was a bit of wonderment about whether or not that threshold should be lower in terms of qualifying for a mandatory jail term. The North Dakota Senate's already approved increased penalties for drunken drivers, but their mandatory jail term kicks in if the person is 0.18% or greater, and also that person could be required to give 20 hours community service. The North Dakota House voted to approve a proposal for expanding Medicaid to folks who do not normally qualify for it. This is part of the federal health care law that was approved 2 years ago. It would extend Medicaid coverage to low-income folks who do not currently qualify for it. Among them are like single people who make $16,000 or less per year. Again, these are people who are not eligible for Medicaid now. There was quite a lot of argument in the House about whether they should support this expansion, because it is part of the Obamacare, the federal health care law that a number of Republicans really do not like at all. But there were folks who who argued in favor of it, who said, well, I don't like Obamacare either, but we're paying for it in terms of increased taxes, and it would not make sense to have the citizenry pay increased taxes for this Medicaid expansion and at the same time not get any benefit from it. The House also approved $12 million to transfer the Missouri River Correctional Center, which is a minimum security prison near the Missouri River in South Bismarck, to the grounds of the state penitentiary, which is several miles to the east, and transfer most of the property of the Missouri River Correctional Center to the North Dakota Parks and Recreation Department. There's about 900 acres down there. It's beautiful river bottomland. There's some homes in the area, and there has been some debate in the legislature for several years about whether this should be privatized, should be developed for homes. What this proposal would do would be to turn that area into a park. We're going to speak now with our guests for the first half hour of the legislature today. We have Senator Dave Elke. He's a Republican from Devil's Lake. We also have Senator Jim Dotzenrod. He is a Democrat from Windmere in rural southeastern North Dakota. And we're going to be talking about a property appraisal bill which would make it possible for appraisers to get access to property sale information that normally is not public. The reason that this is important is because if someone wants to contest the value of their property before a county commission or some board that determines the value of their property for tax reasons, and this does affect a person's property tax bill, that person normally does not have access to the sort of information that they would need in order to make a meaningful challenge to what their property is worth. And what this bill does is makes that information available to an appraiser hired by a person who wants to challenge the value of their property and in doing so perhaps lower their property tax bill. Senator Elke, you amended this bill to do this purpose that I mentioned. Could you just talk about what it is that's at stake here in terms of, someone wants to challenge their property value, try to get their property tax bill lowered, and how is this bill important to them?
Sure, Dale. Well, this goes back a few years. Where the original impetus of the information that is available to any public person, anybody that wanted the information, is kind of a mystery. But I think Senator Dotzenrod and I probably came to an agreement earlier today that this probably goes back to the old German, Norwegian, Anglo-Saxon attitude in North Dakota that said, doggone it, you don't need to know everything about me and what I do. And if I sell my house for $100,000, all I have to report is $1 plus valuable consideration. And that's all you need to know. So that's the way it has been for umpteen years. And when I say umpteen, it probably goes back to statehood. So basically, if you sold your home, Dale, for an extraordinary amount of money, you don't have to tell anybody what you sold it for. It becomes information that's accessible to your county assessors, but it is not accessible to your private assessor. So the problem arises when you get your tax bill and you go, geez, that's really high. How'd that get so high? And you go out and you go to the county and you say, this just seems ridiculous. And they say, well, that's what our appraiser says it is. If you want to get your own appraiser and challenge us, you can do that. So you go out and get your own private appraiser, and he figures it up with the information that he has available to him, and you go back in and you say, see, my appraisal from my private appraiser comes up 25% less than what you're charging me for. And the county appraiser says, oh, yeah, but you don't have all the information that I have access to. And that's the part that kind of stuck in my craw, because I've got a good friend back in Devil's Lake that just hates it when somebody says to him, if you knew what I knew, you'd agree with me. Well, what this amendment does is it basically says, look, whatever your property gets sold for, as long as it's what we would typically call an arm's length agreement, it's a fair trade for money for property, then that's going to show up. That is going to be accessible to both the private appraiser as well as the public appraiser. And there's a whole list of things. There's, roughly 12 things or so that don't have to be in that mix. So, for instance, if I sell my house to my son for $1, and, even though it's worth $150,000, that's an exception because that would only skew the appraisal anyway. So, and we have a whole bunch of exceptions that we'll get into in a little bit. But that was the whole impetus for that amendment, is to try and level the playing field so that the private person can go into those county meetings and be able to understand why his property is being charged the rate it is and have a meaningful answer without having to walk away going, well, I just stuck it up the backside again. There it goes.
Would this also be useful if you're like shopping for a home and trying to figure out if it's fairly priced?
Well, I think, you're going, if you're shopping for a home, if you're doing it all on your own and you're not going through a realtor, maybe you'd want access to that information. Most people either sell their home with a realtor or buy it through a realtor, and the realtors have a good idea of what homes should be selling for because, after all, they've been buying them and selling them. I don't know if that's so critical, but it does certainly play a part when you're looking at whether you think you're being overcharged on your property taxes or not.
Senator Dotson-Rod, how significant do you think this will be to rural folks who might want to challenge their property assessment?
Well, the way that ag land is valued, it's based on the productivity of the land. And so you don't have point of sale things, but the sale information that's used in the determining the taxes on the property. But I do think that information about sales, and with this bill as it's amended, any of these farmland sales would not be protected by the secrecy that we currently have. They would be information that would be available. And I think traditionally there's been a resistance on the part of farmers when they buy or when they sell. Either way, they want that as much as possible to have some control over that information and not, sort of the attitude it's nobody else's business. But I don't think that resistance is as strong today as it would have been a few years ago. There is so much right now that people know that they didn't know a few years ago. There's so much that's available about us personally, about our business, about our families. There's video cameras everywhere. We have sort of moved into an era when I think that the assumption that we could protect and make secret major things, what we paid for a house, what we paid for a piece of land. It seems like you go to the local coffee shop and people there will tell you what the latest land sold for. So I don't really believe that this is going to create a lot of upset, and it will change what's going to be required now. When you go to register the deed, you're going to have to give that information that there's currently, the word in the law is secret for both the dollar amount and the names of the parties involved. Both of those sections or sentences are struck over. That's no longer going to be secret information. It'll be public, and I think in the long run, it's probably just part of what we should expect. So I don't really see that as creating the kind of problems that we might have done 12, 15 years ago.
How important do you think it'll be for folks? I mean, I do think it's probably more common now for folks to build homes in rural areas or purchase them, especially in western North Dakota. And how important is this availability of this information if you're, trying to value a home or trying to get a mortgage on it?
Well, when an assessor goes out to try to establish a value, the more points of sale that assessor has to gauge what the values are in that area, the more accurate, the more reliable, the more repeatable from one assessor to the next, and the more likely you're going to fall within a range of accuracy that's better. So I think that for most people that are watching this and care about it, they're going to feel it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It gives more data more information and more accuracy in pricing and knowing what something's worth.
Why do you think it is done this way now? Is it just a matter of, folks thinking, well, that this is nobody's business? Is there a public policy? Is there a public policy reason for doing it?
I at first had some resistance to this amendment. Dave and I are on the same committee. Senator Elke and I on the same committee. And when this amendment came on, I was somewhat hesitant to go along with it because I assumed that there must be some public policy discussion that took place to develop the rules we have now. That there was a liability issue, a question of potential conflicts of interest or profiteering on certain parties in a real estate transaction. There must have been something, and I've done some checking now with people in the property business, real estate business, checking with the property tax department in the Capitol, and we can't. It's been very hard to find any policy reason. I think Senator Elke was probably right at the outset here. Said that this is something that along the way, individuals, and given the kind of conservative. It's none of your business, your independent attitude we have. I think there was just enough people said, there's no reason for you to have that. That's my information. That's my sale. Keep it secret. And I think the legislature's gone along with that. That's what it appears to me, that we've just grown up with this system.
Senator Elke, there are some exceptions to this disclosure, and you mentioned those. What are some of them?
Well, the exceptions would be those typical things that would skew an appraisal on either side, and it would be like property owned or used by a public utility, personal property which is not considered real property, and when I'm talking about that, we generally think of a mobile home that's movable, not the type of pre-built home that's set down on a permanent foundation or on a basement or something. And if it's sold to property within the same family, because that within the same family, generally they're going to get a different kind of deal than if they sold
Maybe they get charged more.
Well, yeah, in my family, that's the way it works. Sale that's a result of a settlement of an estate, sales to or from a government agency. There are a lot of times properties bought and sold out there that maybe the government pays too much in some cases for things, although I don't know if that's always the case. But
would that apply to eminent domain, you think?
Oh, I'm sure it would. I'm sure it would because it also mentions forced sales, mortgage foreclosures, that type of thing. Sales to or from religious institutions and nonprofit organizations. They get opted out of having to list, what they sold it for. Indicated or sales when there's an indicated change of use by the new owner. So you sell a piece of property, but they change it totally from one thing to another. And I know if you have, I know we're getting to the bitter end here, and I want to jump in on one thing, because if you've had the chance, I work in a bank environment with my insurance agency, and we have a lot of appraisals going on home loans, a lot of people refinancing because the interest rates are so low. And one thing that happens is these appraisers now, the banks want to know what the sales are in your immediate area. Even in our small community at Devil's Lake, they're more interested in what are the homes, how many homes sold within a couple blocks area of you. Not across town, not a mile out of town, right around you. Those are the comparables they're interested in now. And if you can't have that information, you're it makes it tough to negotiate a good loan. So I guess I think the amendment is a good step in the right direction. We still have 2 more periods of this ball game, so it's not over yet.
How do you think it's going to go over in the House? Do you have any feel for that?
I guess I don't know why this wouldn't fly decently in the House. We'll just have to see how it goes. A lot of things are different in the House. You know that.
See, another thing is this amendment that we came up in committee discussion, and it seemed like a good idea. It got put on the bill, but there's been no hearing on the Senate side. So that was one of the concerns we had, but we knew there was going to be a second half. It'll go over to the House side. So we may find something that we're not aware of, something that may come out of the weeds here, some party that feels injured by this. You never know when you have a hearing, but that's going to be the interesting thing is when we hold the hearing on the.
So we're coming up to our mid-session break here, and what are you gentlemen going to do once you leave the Vale of Tears and go back to a normal existence for a few days?
For a couple of days, like I said, I've got an insurance agency. I've got work to do. I've got a pile of policies I've got to get delivered and some people to see and things I put off, so I need to get that done.
So you're not like taking a vacation. You have to go back and get some work done.
Yeah, I've got work to do.
Same thing. I got quite a few appointments on the Monday, and I've got to talk to a couple of high school groups on Tuesday. I am planning to make about a one-day trip to Minneapolis. I have a son there who's going to college, and I'm going to try to get down there and get out of here for a while and get down there for a day or so with him.
How do you think the first half has gone?
Well, I've felt like the first half on our side of the hall and the Senate side has been cooperative and I wouldn't want to say smooth. I don't think that's the right, but I think our leadership in our the left and right side of the conservative liberal, if you want to call it that. Most people in North Dakota, most legislators fall in the middle. There's a couple extremes on either end, but most of us just want to do a good job and make sure we do the right thing for everybody in North Dakota. And I think Senator Dotson-Ron and I have to agree on that.
I think that's exactly right. We're both on the tax committee, and we both get to see what happens when our bills get out on the floor. We haven't had complete consensus on the tax matters, and I think a lot of these questions have implications, long-term implications about how are we as a state going to manage this very unusual set of circumstances that are really not, you just don't find them around. We've got new wealth, quite a bit of it, and are we going to pursue property tax relief and road? There's a lot of infrastructure work, and we know we need to get more money back to those impact areas. So I think that the big thing is when we're all done, we're going to look back and see how did we manage. We had something very unusual happen. We have a tremendous amount of revenue, and how did we use our time, and how did we decide to allocate those resources?
We've been speaking this evening to Senator Jim Dotson-Rod. He's a gentleman whose voice you just heard. He's a Democrat from Winemere, North Dakota, in southeastern North Dakota. We've also been speaking to Senator Dave Elke. He's a Republican from Devil's Lake. Both these gentlemen serve on the Senate Finance and Taxation Committee, which is one of the points of where the action is in the legislature this year with the revenue surplus that we have and the tax cut proposals that accompany that. Thank you for your time, gentlemen. Coming up, we are going to have a group of folks speaking about the Chancellor of the University System. This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today radio show. We're coming to you live from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, and things are hopping right along down on the service floor. Folks are having a good time, having a drink, having a nice meal. And if you're in downtown Bismarck or even on the outskirts of town, you might think about dropping by and checking out our fine establishment here. We have with us this evening Senator Tony Grinberg. He's a Republican from Fargo, and he's one of the vice chairman of the Appropriations Committee. In fact, we have both of them with us. We also have the other vice chairman, Senator Bill Bowman. He's a Republican from Bowman. We also have Senator Karen Krebsbaugh. She's a Republican from Minot. We're going to speak this evening about something that the Senate did today. They approved a $850,000 approximately addition to the State Board of Higher Education budget bill to make it available to the Board of Higher Education to, if they wish, to buy out the contract of the Chancellor, Dr. Ham Shirvani. Dr. Shirvani was hired last July. He is paid $349,000 annually. He has a 3-year contract, and there's been some discomfort with some of the decisions he's made and the manner in which he's made them, and we're going to ask our guests about what they think about the idea of buying out his contract and why they support it or why they oppose it. Now, Senator Grinberg, I want to start with you because this was your idea. This was something you brought up. And could you tell us why you brought it up and why you think it's worth this kind of money to show Mr. Shirvani, Dr. Shirvani, the door?
Well, sure, Dale. As you noted in your opening here, that this provides the board an option. And, with that said, I've been privileged to serve in the state Senate for 20 years. And you've been around a long time, too, and know politics and know the legislature and how we've conducted business. And it became apparent to me last summer that the directive and the changes that came with immediate abrupt changes to board policy and allowing the chancellor to really excel with his vision versus a North Dakota vision was concerning to me. And, I've said on the floor of the Senate and in various interviews since I proposed this proposal, if you will, to allow the board an option, 2 points. One, if this trend continues and the unrest and the lack of trust, and as any organization leader goes, if you don't have the trust and the buy-in and the camaraderie of leading an organization, you're going to fail. And so trying to determine what is the right course. In 1999, we had a lot of turmoil in higher education in North Dakota, and it was a 2-year process that brought the legislature, key private sector leaders across the state, and the board together to come up with a plan that was a shared vision in higher education. And we experienced a tremendous amount of success for 8-9 years, and that plan had a sustaining the vision plan that started to erode with legislative questioning and things like that. And so from my perspective, we need to get back to having where everyone contributes to the future of higher education. That's what North Dakotans expect, and not empowering one individual with what his ideas are, and creating a lot of turmoil and angst amongst campuses. Things that have floated around that people on the campus that can't talk to legislators, and the things that are just beginning to boil and escalate since last summer to this session. It just continues to erode and get worse, and so I've been a supporter of higher education my entire 20 years, and I was asked today by a member of the media, well, aren't you just really carrying NDSU's water on this deal? I said that is not the case. I will grant that years ago with Robert Potts and Joe Chapman there was an issue between the legislature and the chancellor. This is widespread. This is a significant deal with every campus in the state of North Dakota, not just NDSU.
Yeah, the point that you mentioned was raised on the Senate floor by John Andrus, who essentially said, and he did not mention NDSU specifically, but he said this is a case where college presidents who are discomfited by Dr. Shervani are going to their legislators and essentially trying to gin up opposition to him. I mean, is there something to that?
John and I are classmates of 1992. And I think the world of John. I just respectfully disagree with John. This is much broader than just one issue and one circumstance. And when you have a situation that is felt in every city with a campus in this state that it is today, there is a huge problem. And the board needs to step up and recognize that problem is getting worse.
Just the things that you mentioned that the chancellor has done, aren't these things that the board wants him to do? And if that's true, isn't it the fault of the board rather than the chancellor?
To some degree, I understand where you're coming from, Dale, and obviously, it's been quoted in the press that he's doing what the board asked him to do. But the style and the manner of the rapid progression of changes and the way he has treated people and the communication that I've received, that from folks that are current system employees, campus employees, to employees that were let go, that feel that this is not going to a good place, and.
Senator Krebsbaugh, Minot State University in particular, which is in your stomping grounds, has had difficulties with decisions that the chancellor has either made or influenced. And in particular, there was a decision made about tuition charged to out-of-state students that essentially it was perceived that this new policy would disadvantage Canadian students, of whom there are a lot at Minot State, and that it would decrease the school's enrollment. And that was a specific beef they had with the chancellor. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. Basically, when the policies came out, it was more or less that there was a set rate for tuition for in-state, for out-of-state, neighboring states, and so on. And Minot State had adopted a policy. They had contracts with these students while they were at the university. Some were freshmen, some were sophomores at this point, but it would be like changing a contract in midstream to do what this policy was requiring. I will have to say that they did review it, and Dr. Shervani and the board members that were involved with it at the time, President Espegard and some of the others, they did agree to ease up on that and to allow some time to make a transition, which was grateful. But, you know, the method in which it came, it was so dictatorial. There wasn't really the chance to sit down beforehand and work out some of these things, which should have been done. Then it wouldn't have been such a big deal if they could have had an opportunity to work with the university presidents or whoever they needed to consult with. But, you know, when a dictate comes down and you haven't had opportunity to input, that makes it not too pleasant.
I gathered that Minot State is one of the campuses that has frankly, a particular beef with the chancellor. Is that correct?
Well, I think the Minot State situation has probably been brought to light more easily because of the fact that our president, Dr. Fuller, has resigned as of June of 2014. So I think he's a president that has been a little bit more free in speaking about the issues because he has nothing to lose, so to speak. And I think there's other presidents that would have been right out front, but they virtually were afraid to do so.
Senator Bowman, you opposed the addition of the money to the Board of Higher Education budget to allow for the buyout of the contract, and you don't have a higher education institution in your district, unlike Senator Grinberg and Senator Krebsbaugh. Why is it that you oppose this inclusion of the money?
Well, the first thing, Dale, I'd like to say is I have all the respect in the world for my two colleagues.
You should tell about your seating arrangement.
Well, I sit right between both of these on the floor, so it puts me in kind of a precarious situation.
So you extend one arm and hit one, and extend the other arm and hit the other, right?
But we get along really well and have a lot of respect for each other. I guess in all my business experiences and stuff, what I looked at would have been a little different approach. Not to say they're wrong, but just my own personal feelings that I would have talked to the board first and found out if the board is aware of all the things that we've heard. If they are, then what exactly are they going to do? Because when we set that board up, I thought that was what their job was. And we're supposed to be kind of in the backside of this unless there's a major problem. I see where they're coming from with the attitude and some of the remarks that you've heard about the new chancellor, but I don't work with them. I don't have anything to do with him, so I'm kind of neutral on that position. But it's just a difference of opinion and a different approach to trying to solve the same problem. And they probably know a lot more than I do because their colleges are in their communities, and mine is 80 miles away.
Have you heard anything from your farming constituencies about how the chancellor has affected, if he has indeed, the operation of the experiment station and agricultural experiment station at NSU, and also research priorities decided upon by the State Board of Agricultural Research?
That's an excellent question. As you know, I do that budget, and I've done it for quite a few years. And I have been really given kind of a free rein in putting that budget together, but I also spend a lot of time doing that, and there's been no direction at all to change anything from the chancellor. None.
Okay. And how do you think people in your district in particular, Senator Bowman, and also just people in North Dakota generally, would react to the idea of spending this much money to buy out a person in the first year of his contract?
That's a hard question to answer because everybody looks at it different, just like we're here discussing that. Nobody knows the right answer. But we all know that if there's an issue, we have to try to do the best we can. And so I think people in a rural district like I represent would probably not be real happy to the fact that we're already putting amount of money into something to get rid of somebody that the board hasn't made the decision to get rid of yet. I might be wrong, And if I am, I'm the first to apologize, but it's just a different perspective from an outside area, and I represent, the biggest district in the state with no colleges, so I look at it a little different than my two colleagues do.
Senator Grinberg, I'd like you and Senator Krebsbaugh to address this question as well. Is it a good idea to buy out the chancellor's contract, especially in the amount of money at stake? Would it be better perhaps to give him a chance to change his style?
Well, Dale, I think that's a point worth consideration. The legislative branch of government is the closest to the people. We all represent communities, and we are closer to the people than the State Board of Higher Education as a whole, and the governor, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. I was quoted in the Chronicle of Higher Education called me in June with the hiring decision by Dr. Shervani, and I was asked my opinion based on his past performance that was well documented. A Google search will tell just about anybody you want to know about his performance that is equating itself to debate here in the state. In my opinion, it's part of the question that you asked, is that my opinion that he needed to set a vision for North Dakota and then not come across as heavy-handed, because every community, the university system office has no constituency. Every campus has an alumni base and a community who believes in that campus. And so you come in with a radical agenda, a heavy-handedness, you're doomed for failure. And part of that's driven by the boards. We want fast change. Gets back to my point that North Dakotans have come to expect a collaborative process. This process we started with a shared vision in 2001 that kicked off has won national awards. We are an envy of the nation with what we performed and our performance over a decade ago. And here we are today with direction that's been set with one individual. And you factor all the things into the equation, it's just created an environment that has to change.
What do you think about that analysis, Senator Krebsbaugh?
I think the method in which it was introduced to the universities was part of the problem. And I understand, and I don't think any one of us are opposed to change. We welcome
I would
change.
agree with that.
And, and your campus presidents welcome change. But they like to be a part of that change. They like to have some input, because who knows better than they how it's going to affect their campus. And I know, back, when this first hit, when the Pathways was introduced, it was requested that they give input as to what they thought. Well, I know in Minot it was shared with the faculty and with the students and asked for their opinions on how this whole thing would work. And there was an awful lot of information that was given from the university to the chancellor's office. And I don't think that information was welcomed the way it should have been. I think they were incensed that the fact that they took and sent in a large document for them to review, and at the same time, these were the true feelings of what was happening. Now, your other part of your question was?
Well, it has to do with, I guess I'd like to kind of shift gears a little bit, and I'll ask you this. Should the Board of Higher, Senator Grinberg, for example, he mentioned that that information was known about Dr. Shervani's management style from his previous tenure as a president of a California university. And the board knew this, and their consultant knew this. They hired him anyway. So how should we remedy this sort of situation from happening in the future? Should the legislature take a greater role in the hiring of the chancellor, or how should this work?
I don't think that's necessary, but at the same time, I think that offering to the legislators some input is not wrong, because we too have to work with these people. And I think that as far as what should be the role or what should happen here on out, I think Senator Dever really hit it on the head today.
And what did he say?
Well, do you recall the exact words? It was more or less like the doubts and the intimidations that had been happening were not the way we do things in North Dakota. And that created an awful lot of angst. But he said if it's up to him if he wants to make a change.
That's good.
Yeah, Senator Dever made reference to an email which he said he received from a university system employee who essentially felt intimidated and in danger of losing his or her job if he or she spoke out.
And that's wrong. I mean, in North Dakota, we want to be free to talk to anybody at any time and lay things on the table and discuss it. And that's where I think mistakes have been made.
What sort of impact do you think, all of you, what sort of impact do you think that this is going to have on the influence of the Board of Higher Education and the operation of the university system? Senator Grinberg, what do you think?
Well, it's a great question. I've stressed in numerous interviews that, in my opinion, we have fine institutions. Doesn't mean we have things we can change to do better. But we have committed faculty and staff that making a difference in the state, providing a quality education to our students. And there are areas, obviously, that Senator Krebsbach mentioned about pathways and improving. Remind me of the second part of your question.
How is it going to affect how the Board of Higher Education operates and how the university system functions?
I think at a governance level and above, we're at a crossroads. Some will talk about the days of Bill Langer having his way and firing faculty. Those days are never going to come back because of transparency in government and instant information and communication. I think there are 4 constitutional amendments that have been introduced in the last couple of days regarding reorganization of the Board of Higher Education. One of those I would expect will have a chance how it all works out with amendments, et cetera, and the hearings that potentially could go out on the November ballot if that's the way it ends up in 2014 for the voters to say, do we need a Board of Higher Education? And I think we're at a crossroads with that discussion. I don't have anything against the Board of Higher Education. They're great people. But I think if you look back at decade after decade after decade, we continue, and Senator Bowman mentioned this the other day on the floor, I believe, with the debate. We continue to have this dialogue or this difference of opinion. And if you stand up at 50,000 feet and look down objectively, is it the right structure? And I think we have to be starting to ask the question, do we have the right structure to move forward into the future?
So, Senator Krebsbach, do we have the right structure?
I'm sure there are some people that will say, no, we do not. But I think that we have a good structure. I think it's a matter of people understanding their role and their responsibilities in getting done what needs to be done for higher education. I think we've got some good people on the Board of Higher Ed. I think that in this case, higher ed had really gotten burned. And a lot of that is public's fault because we've had some incidences that have happened on campuses, and rather than dealing with those or allowing those incidents to be dealt with and corrected, they've made a big blown up thing on it, and it's put higher ed in a very bad light. And higher ed in this state is really quite good. In fact, I'm very proud of our higher ed system, and I think we need to let them work. Do we need some controls? I'm not going to say we don't. I think that it's fine to have these. But I think with the structure, I think the higher ed board, and I think that the chancellor position can work if the right parameters are set out for it.
So, Senator Bowman, do you think that the structure that we have of higher education governance is sustainable?
I've thought about this quite a bit because we have 2 options, in my opinion. Option 1 is to sit down with the Board of Higher Education as legislators and voice our opinion with them to see if they are addressing the problems that we're currently having. But we also know from our past history that chancellors are kind of like losing football coaches in a Class B school. If you lose, you're out. And so then what's the ultimate way to handle that problem? Is it to get rid of the board and the chancellor? Is it to sit down with the board and see if they aren't doing the responsibilities that our Constitution gave them to do? I've got them all right here. So I've read that. And you get mixed feelings. I think if we continue to go down this path, we might just as well be the legislative body that governs the colleges. If we can figure out a better solution to that, I'm in favor because I love our colleges. We got a lot to really be proud of, but we don't need the adversity between legislative branch, our boards, and our universities. That's not good for any of us.
What's running through my mind is I'm sure every Class B football coach out there is thinking, boy, I wish I get paid $350K. Well, we're coming up on a mid-session break here. What are you going to be doing once you depart the Vale of Tears for a few days?
Well,
Senator Grinberg?
Dale, I anticipate I'll be in the office tomorrow by 1 o'clock, work Friday, spend Saturday with my family, and go on a business trip Sunday and come back here Wednesday.
Senator Krebsbaugh.
Well, it's kind of ironic, but it seems like at every crossover there's an awful lot of meetings back home that I have to take in, and I plan to do as much as I can and probably get a little work done at home as well.
Outstanding. Senator Bowman.
Well, we have a forum right away when I get home, which we've had about every year at crossover, so we'll discuss what the concerns are of the people and find out what we're doing right or what we're doing wrong. And they'll put me on the spot in them little communities. I'm just like that one coach. You have to be on guard all the time.
Yes, but you've been on the job for a long time. You haven't been terminated like some losing Class B football coach.
Well, but that can happen in any election.
It can.
So I think we're going to do a lot of really positive things this session. We'll have to look at the final budget and see where we're going to have to maybe move some money around. Or I think we're $800 million over the governor's budget right now. And is that something that we can sustain, or are we going to have to back off on some of these appropriation bills?
Yeah, we've been speaking this evening to Senator Bill Bowman, whose voice you just heard. He's one of the vice chairmen of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He's a Republican from Bowman. We also have with us the other vice chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Fargo Senator Tony Grinberg, who is a Republican from Fargo. We also have with us Senator Karen Krebsbaugh of Minot, a Republican, and we've been speaking tonight about the Chancellor of the University System and a proposal to buy out his contract for $850,000. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and we appreciate your conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dale.
The Legislature Today is brought to you in part by Prairie Outpost Log Homes, your custom lifestyle exemplified through custom timber work, design, and build.